Your Honour, the first witness for the day is AWF, and he'll be giving his evidence via video link in Brisbane.
Is he on the line?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes, Your Honour.
And can you see us?
Yes, I can, Your Honour.
We can't see you at the moment. We can hear you, but we can't see you. We know what that
Perhaps
is.
that.
Oh, apparently we're not meant to see
Did you hear that?
AWF.
Apparently your image not to be given to us. Did you hear that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Now, you need to be sworn to give evidence. Do you want to take an oath on a Bible or an affirmation?
Affirmation, please.
Well then, would you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly.
I do solemnly. Sorry, I've got a slightly different one. Could you please repeat again? Sorry.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
Declare and affirm.
declare and affirm
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
Shall be the truth.
shall be the truth,
The whole truth.
the whole truth,
And nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, AWF. Can I just, for the record, confirm with you that you've chosen to be known by the pseudonym AWF?
Yes.
And you have prepared a statement to assist the Royal Commission, and that's dated the 16th of April 2015?
Yes.
And is that statement a true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Your Honour, I tender that statement.
It'll be Exhibit 27-7.
Now, AWF, can I ask for you to read your statement onto the record, perhaps starting at paragraph 5?
Yes. My name is Dr. AWF. I'm 60 years of age. I'm the younger of 2 children. I had an older sister. Throughout my childhood, I lived in St Ives, New South Wales. My father died when I was 11 years old, and from that time I lived with my sister and mother. I'm currently a medical practitioner. In 1979, I graduated from the University of New South Wales with a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgery. I've also since gained additional qualifications, including a Masters of Public Health, a Fellowship of the Australian Faculty of Public Health Medicine, a Diploma of Obstetrics and a Diploma of Tropical Medicine. I've held a number of positions, including as an intern and resident medical officer at the Royal North Shore Hospital, resident and senior medical officer at Royal Darwin Hospital, and a specialist public health rural medical practitioner in the Northern Territory, and senior rural medical practitioner on call for medical consultation work for the top end of the Northern Territory and remote areas. I have been involved in the provision of healthcare to remote Aboriginal communities in the top end of the Northern Territory for more than 20 years. I have been a strong advocate for the protection of children and young people from sexual and other forms of abuse. I wrote a submission to the 2007 Little Children Are Sacred report in the Northern Territory and appeared before Mr Rex Wild QC and Ms Pat Anderson, the inquiry co-chairs, to express my views and concerns. As a medical practitioner and in the light of what Rolleston did to me, I am unable to address him by the professional title of doctor. I was a patient of Rolleston from about the ages of 13 to 20 years of age. I saw Rolleston at his practice at 1 Sturt Place, St Ives. I recall the waiting room was towards the street aspect of the house, and I think the doctor's consulting room was away from the road. I recall that the consultation room that Rolleston used was set towards the back of the building, and I only remember being examined by Rolleston when I went to the St Ives practice. In or around 1968, when I was about 14 years old, I went to the St Ives practice. The consult was in relation to a laceration of the back of my throat. I believe that was the first time I saw Rolleston, and when I was about 15 years old, I feigned abdominal pain to get out of playing football. I was accompanied by my mother to the St Ives practice on these two occasions, and I believe that on the second occasion my mother stayed in the waiting area and did not come into the consulting room with Rolleston and myself. I was not abused on these two occasions. Between January 1970 and December 1972, when I was between 16 and 18 years old, I went to the St Ives practice to see Rolleston. I cannot recall the medical reason I attended the St Ives practice on that occasion, but I recall that I went by myself. On this occasion, Rolleston asked me to enter the consultation room he had on previous occasions. Rolleston and I were alone in the consulting room. He said, "I have to test your semen." I recall feeling confused and Rolleston explaining to me that I should sit on the bed and masturbate to provide a sample of semen. At that time I was not sexually active. However, I complied with Rolleston's request as he was a doctor and I trusted him. Rolleston appeared calm, confident and professional to me, and I understood from the way he spoke and behaved that this was an everyday medical practice. Rolleston told me to take off my pants and sit on the examination table. Rolleston provided me with some lubricant and I remember feeling very embarrassed. I took off my own pants. I was lying on the examination table at the time with my head away from the direction of Rolleston's desk. I was unable to get an erection as I was feeling very uncomfortable. I recall that Rolleston was in the room while I was trying to masturbate, but I'm not sure if he was watching. Rolleston asked me how I was going, and I sat up, and when I told him I was not able to get an erection, he told me to lie down and "I'll give you a hand." Rolleston then proceeded to masturbate me. I do not remember Rolleston wearing any gloves when masturbating me. I remember him looking very nonchalant and gazing around the room and up to the ceiling before turning his back on me. I remember still feeling very uncomfortable, and he said that I should close my eyes and think about a girl. The whole process took several minutes until I was able to produce the semen sample. I don't recall what he collected the semen in. Rolleston cleaned some of the semen off me and examined a sample of semen. He said the semen was okay, and Rolleston then said to get dressed, and I did. I remember that after this consultation I felt uncomfortable, as nothing like this had ever happened to me before. Having lost my father at 11 years of age...
Can we just stop for a minute? We've got an image.
Yes.
Can we just pause for a moment? Can we take the image down?
I'm instructed, Your Honour, that the visual image is okay in the sense that there are no media in the room currently.
Well, the image will be outside.
It's not on the web stream or outside, and it's not outside. It's purely in the room.
All right. Did you hear that, Doctor?
Yes, Your Honour.
Your image, we can now see you on a screen in the hearing room. You understand that?
Yes, I do understand.
You happy with that?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, keep going.
Okay. Having lost my father at 11 years of age and living with my mother and sister since his death, I was shy and lacking in confidence at that time of my life. I also trusted Rolleston and thought that perhaps what he did to me was a normal medical procedure. I did not tell anyone about what happened after I left the surgery. In or around early 1975, between the 1st of March and the 30th of June 1975, when I was about 20 years old, I again visited Rolleston at the St Ives practice for a sore throat. I went by myself. Rolleston took me to his consultation room as he had in previous appointments. Rolleston examined me. During the consultation, Rolleston said to me that he needed a semen sample. Rolleston then proceeded to masturbate me in the same way as before. Following ejaculation, Rolleston said to me that my semen was normal. I did not see Rolleston perform any test on the semen sample. Rolleston asked me to put my pants back on, and I did. After I got dressed, Rolleston performed a blood test on me. I had a vivid recollection of this consultation because following this appointment I had repeated attacks of tonsillitis and was admitted to Hornsby Hospital where I had my tonsils removed. I felt very uncomfortable with what Rolleston did, but I continued to trust his professional knowledge and ability. In or around 1976 to 1977, when I was about 22 or 23 years old and studying in my 4th or 5th year of medical studies at university, I worked for 1 week with Rolleston at the St Ives practice. During this time, Rolleston was working with Dr. Pollitt, but I worked primarily with Rolleston. During my 1 week placement at the St Ives practice, I was not aware of any rumours or innuendos of child sexual abuse surrounding Rolleston at the St Ives practice. In or around 1979 to 1980, when I was about 25 or 26 years old, while undertaking my internship at Royal North Shore Hospital, I again saw Rolleston. He was employed in a senior position in the emergency department. At that time, having completed my medical school training, I was aware that the testing of a semen sample was not a recognised test for infections and was used for infertility investigations. I knew that masturbation to obtain a semen sample is performed in private by the patient and not by the medical practitioner. I knew at that time without any doubt that Rolleston's instructions to masturbate me and then masturbating me himself was sexual abuse and professional misconduct. I did not report my abuse to anyone at the Royal North Shore Hospital. I felt intimidated by the fact that Rolleston was a more senior doctor. I acknowledge Rolleston as my past general practitioner when I saw him around the emergency department at Royal North Shore Hospital, but I generally avoided him and did not confront him about the abuse. I was also reluctant to report the abuse because of the possible impact on my career at Royal North Shore Hospital. I was contemplating at that time pursuing a specialist training position at the hospital. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, sexual abuse of young people by persons in positions of authority was rarely, if ever, publicly acknowledged or discussed. I was apprehensive that raising the subject of child sexual abuse may have more serious professional repercussions for me than for Rolleston. In March 2011, while I was working an on-call night, I opened an email version of a publication called 6 Minute Newsletter and noticed in the medicine and the media section a reference to an elderly Sydney doctor found guilty of sexually assaulting boys in his North Shore surgery under the guise of needing a sample of semen from them. And there was a link to an article in The Australian. The article, dated 8th of March 2011, said that a doctor who could not be named for legal reasons had been found guilty of 10 charges at the New South Wales District Court. The article said that the complainants had given evidence that the doctor either masturbated them or ordered them to do it as he needed a semen sample. The offences were said to have occurred in the doctor's North Shore surgery between 1975 and 1981. When I read this, I immediately knew the doctor was Rolleston. In or around March 2011, after reading the Australian article on Rolleston, I started to search the internet for details on him. I read about Rolleston having chaperone conditions imposed on his New South Wales medical registration on the New South Wales Medical Board website. I read that the Medical Board in 2009 had prohibited Rolleston providing any medical service to patients between 11 and 18 years of age and required him to have a chaperone to see any patients less than 11 years of age. Knowing that what Rolleston had done to me at the age of 20, having read that he did the same to so many other complainants, I remember feeling shocked and angry that Rolleston was allowed to continue practising medicine. I was afraid that there would be other victims like me outside the age range set by the Medical Board. I also read on the Medical Board's website that following the chaperone conditions imposed on Rolliston's registration in 2009, that the Medical Board had suspended Rolliston from practising medicine for a period of 8 weeks in a further decision. From reading the Medical Board's website, I felt that the multiple and recurrent allegations of sexual abuse of unrelated adolescent males by a registered medical practitioner should have resulted in more than an 8-week suspension of medical registration. I remember wondering what allegations the Medical Board would consider necessary to justify indefinitely cancelling Rolliston's registration. I decided to contact the New South Wales Police. In or around mid-March 2011, I called the New South Wales District Court and said words to the effect, "Can I speak to the magistrate?" I was told that I could not, but was referred to the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. From a conversation with the officer of the Director of Public Prosecutions, I was put in touch with the New South Wales Police, and in particular Detective Matthew Erickson, Hornsby Police Station. Detective Erickson rang me a few times and then met with me in April 2011 near Brisbane Airport for an interview. And I cannot speak highly enough of the professionalism of Detective Erickson. Rolliston was charged with abusing many complainants, including me. Around that time, I told my mother and my wife about the abuse. My abuse by Rolliston is something that I have thought about periodically in my life. Until a few years ago, I did not discuss the details of the sexual abuse inflicted on me by Rolliston with anyone. I have, however, been periodically troubled and angry since being abused. I occasionally made inquiries about his whereabouts without disclosing the reason for the question. In the past, when I Googled his name, I noticed a report that he was working in Broken Hill. I regret that I did not come forward at the time, but I still felt uncomfortable about a public disclosure and the potential effect on my family. I had hoped that he would face justice on what had already come to light, but I had in the back of my mind that the time period for reporting such offences had probably passed. During the trial process, I was pleased to have the opportunity for my witness statement to be read out in court and to have my victim impact statement verbally presented to Rolliston. However, Rolliston's blanket denial that he had ever molested any patient at St Ives or elsewhere, both to the court and to the Medical Board, was for some time distressing, and I had difficulty concentrating and sleeping. As I came to know of other victims of Rolliston in the criminal trial process, I did feel a sense of relief that Rolliston had to finally acknowledge and accept his guilt. I hope that this admission in relation to my abuse was genuine remorse and not simply for expedience. Even today, I have lingering concerns that there may be other victims of Rolliston's sexual abuse who may not have come forward due to shame, or that they may not have heard of his convictions. Perhaps the positive end result of my abuse is that I believe that in my continuing professional career as a medical practitioner, I have been more empathetic to victims of sexual abuse and more of an advocate for victims of child sexual abuse than I may otherwise have been. In the 2013 Medical Tribunal, in 2013 Medical Tribunal, it said that the respondent is not permitted to reapply for his registration for a period of 4 years from the date of the judgment. It seems to me that Rolliston could theoretically apply for re-registration as a medical practitioner after 4 years, which is in May 2017, which I find troubling. If I can offer a suggestion on policy recommendation, it would be that I believe that the medical authorities should not permit a deregistered applicant who has been convicted of serious sexual abuse of children and adolescent males to be able to reapply for registration after 4 years. And I hope that the legislation governing deregistration of medical practitioners can be strengthened to reflect this.
Thank you, AWF. Do you have anything to add to that statement?
Look, I don't know whether this is the time, but have been thinking about it, and there are sort of 4 points that I would like to be able to raise, if that's possible, please.
Yes, go ahead.
I've heard many reports from the Commission hearings to date concerning institutional failures to respond or inappropriate institutional responses to the sexual abuse of children. Appropriate responses are rarely reported in the media but do occur. I consider that once I did report the sexual abuse I suffered to the police, the response was appropriate and appreciated. The police, and particularly Detective Matthew Erickson, were empathetic and professional, and the court delivered an appropriate judgment, and Rolleston has been punished. You know, I say this in the hope that those abused will have the confidence to report their abuse. Excuse me, just have a sip of water. And I'd also be, the second point is, I would also be disturbed to walk away from the Commission today and feel that the Australian public perceive that sexual abuse of children is endemic in the medical profession. And I believe that nothing could be further from the truth. The few bad apples, should not I believe, be seen as a tip of an iceberg. It's very difficult for the public, but you know, the professional role of doctors, you know, can go into, you know, very highly personal areas, and doctors see this as part of their everyday work. And but I think it's perhaps patients sometimes would wonder why, and I think I'd encourage all patients to actually ask why a certain procedure or something is being done if they feel uncomfortable about it. And I'm sure most doctors will be able to explain that, but I don't believe it is something that is very widespread in the medical profession. The third point I'd like to say is when child sexual abuse by a medical professional is reasonably alleged, medical institutions should respond immediately and decisively. I do not believe that this happened in the Rolleston case, and I could run through that, but I'm sure you have those sort of date frames of what happened. But you know, I regard my abuse by Rolleston as abhorrent, but towards the lower end of the sexual abuse spectrum compared to many reports from the Commission to date. His incomprehensible behaviour has affected my life, but obviously not to the extent of other individuals who were abused by him. I do admire and respect those who came forward, sometimes repeatedly, to expose his abuse, as it gave me the opportunity to come forward as well. But I do have concerns that there are likely to be more victims of Rolleston who have not come forward, either because they were not aware of the case against him or because they were too ashamed or had reconciled and moved on. You know, perhaps more will come forward after this commission. Yeah. Now, the fourth point is, you know, I trust that the Australian Health Professionals Registration Authority and affiliated state and territory medical boards have revised their approach in response to multiple and repeated allegations of sexual abuse of children, and that the legislation governing these statutory bodies appropriately reflects the seriousness of the alleged abuse. For the habitual nature of the most serious of allegations against Rolleston, the conditions imposed by the New South Wales Medical Board and the Medical Tribunal on his continual medical practice were, I believe, grossly inadequate and not in the best interest of the complainants. In this instance, the responsibility of the New South Wales Medical Board and tribunals were obviously skewed in favour of the doctor at the expense of the patient. That Rolleston was permitted by the New South Wales Medical Board to consult with patients over 18 years of age, or any patients for that matter, after multiple similar complaints of sexual abuse was disturbing. To be deregistered for 8 weeks after breaching his conditions of practice and then being able to resume conditional medical practice is incomprehensible. I was older than 18 when I was abused by Rolleston on a second occasion, confirming that those patients over 18 were not immune to his pattern of sexual abuse as assumed by the statutory bodies involved. How many others have been indecently assaulted may never be known. That patients were not privy to the reasons for his conditional medical registration, which would have allowed them to make an informed decision whether to be his patient or go elsewhere, is of concern. That he was theoretically able to apply for reinstatement of his medical registration 4 years after his conviction beggars belief. I sometimes think, the role of medical boards and tribunals, it's sometimes very difficult for them to sift through what is a genuine complaint and what isn't. In this instance, I think with Rolleston, there was, it was very clear cut, and it was crystal clear what was going on, and yet, in my opinion, they failed to act appropriately, and I suspect that there were others who were abused, in the time after they'd made their inappropriate decisions. And thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the Commission.
Doctor, can I just ask you about your criticisms of the medical tribunal and the 4-year period? What, in your view, should the tribunal have said in relation to his deregistration?
I think there should be no re-registration potential. I think
so
that
a life ban, in other words.
A life ban, without doubt, and if it's possible to withdraw the title of doctor. It wasn't that long ago that there was a big move to, it's totally irrelevant probably, but to disallow doctors to use their professional title once they'd retired, and here is someone who has been convicted in a court, and through, the medical tribunals and boards, and is still allowed to call themselves a doctor. I find that's, as a victim, quite disturbing.
Yeah. Now, the reason why you would suggest a life ban, would you be of the view that should be the position of any doctor who is convicted of sexually abusing a child?
Yes.
So one conviction would be sufficient for a life ban. Is that what you're thinking?
Look, I think if it's proven beyond doubt, I think that would be appropriate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But as I've said before, I think that there are spurious allegations for various reasons, about doctors, and and it's very hard to sift through those. But I think, sometimes I think, they're seen for what they are. But other times where it's proven beyond doubt, then I really think it's a serious enough offence to take away that medical registration and not to impose these, in a way, ridiculous chaperone conditions and to set age limits for, as I've said before, for people to say, well, after 18, it's a free-for-all, and anyone who's gullible enough or who's trusting enough, will be potentially abused as a result. I think that's most inappropriate.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
No, thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you, Doctor. No one else has any questions of you. Thank you for coming and telling us of your experience today. You're now formally excused.
Thank you, Your Honour, and thank you to Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. I call AWC.
You take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Affirmation.
Yes. Would you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly and sincerely, truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission
that the evidence that I shall give to this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat.
AWC, for the record, you've chosen to be known by the pseudonym AWC in these proceedings.
Yeah.
And you've prepared a statement to assist the Royal Commission, and that's dated the 24th of April 2015.
Yeah.
And the statement is true and correct to the best of your knowledge and
Yes.
belief.
It'll be Exhibit 27.8.
Can I ask now that you read that statement onto the record
Okay. Start right at the start.
at 5?
My full name is AWC. I am 51 years of age. In or around 1967 or 1968, when I was 3 or 4 years old, my father and mother divorced. Following the divorce, my mother, sister and I travelled to live in England for 2 or 3 years. In or around 1972, when I was 8 years old, we came back and settled in Sydney. As a family, we were very close to my grandparents. When we were growing up, we would often go directly from school to my grandparents' home and meet my mother there. When my mother was away from Sydney, my sister and I would stay with my grandparents and enjoy the Northern Beaches region. My sister and I have fond memories of our childhood, and we had a good upbringing. Following high school, I held a few different jobs, including an internship with the Australian Broadcasting Network, as well as retail jobs. When I was 21 years old, I commenced my first business enterprise, a retail store in Mossman. Eventually, the store expanded from 1 to 12 stores. I currently own and manage the flagship store whilst engaging in a number of other business projects. I'm presently married and I have 2 children. On the 24th of July, 1979, when I was 15 years old, I was playing in the playground at high school when I fell and hurt my back on a metal plate. I had hurt my coccyx bone. I went to the school sick bay, and the school called my grandmother to come and pick me up. I was living with my grandmother at the time because my mother was away. When my grandmother picked me up from school, she took me to the Royal North Shore Hospital Emergency Department. I was in pain from the fall. I remember the emergency department had large plastic perspex doors that swung open as you enter. We went over to the nurse's counter and then took a seat. After a short time, one of the nurses called out, "Julian, AWC." Dr. Rolleston said. The nurse then led my grandmother and turned her around and walked her back through the swinging doors into the waiting area of the emergency department. I wanted my grandmother to come with me. Dr. Rolleston then took me into a small office and closed the door. I remember that he locked the door. The small office that we were in was not in the emergency ward setting where there typically would be a number of beds in close proximity, with curtains drawn and a number of hospital staff walking around. The small office that Dr. Rolleston and I were in had 2 chairs separated by a desk and an examination bed and a wash basin and bench with medical equipment along one wall. It was a closed office with no windows. When the door into the office was shut, there was no visibility into or out of the room from the passageway. No one entered the small office during the time that I was with Dr. Rolleston. Dr. Rolleston and I had a conversation in words to the effect, Dr. Rolleston said, "What seems to be the problem?" I said, "I hurt my bone in the bottom of my neck." Dr. Rolleston said, "Your coccyx bone." I said, "Yeah." Dr. Rolleston said, "How did you do that?" I said, "I fell over in the playground at school mucking around and I fell onto a metal plate." Dr. Rolleston said, "Well, hop up on the bench." I did so. Dr. Rolleston said, "Lie down on your side, take your pants down." I then lay on my left side, facing Dr. Olson, who was standing at about the level of my waist. I pulled down my shorts to about my thigh level, and Dr. Rolleston then took hold of my shorts, removed them completely from one leg, and then he removed my underwear in the same manner. Dr. Rolleston said, "We have to check to see if you have blood in your semen, and we have to see if you have blood in your anus." I remember I was scared that I could be bleeding internally and that I may die. I said, "How can there be blood in my semen?" Dr. Rolleston said, "That's very easy to happen. We won't know until we check." I recall that I felt alarmed at this stage, but as Dr. Rolleston was putting on a glove during this discussion, I believed that he was going to perform a medical procedure. I recall that he initially only put a glove on one hand only. He then started to stroke my penis with the hand without a glove until I obtained an erection. He continued this for a minute or two, and then he moved his gloved hand between my legs and put one of his fingers in my anus. He then commenced moving his finger around vigorously in my anus whilst continuing to stroke my penis. He continued for about 2 minutes. Dr. Rolleston then stopped masturbating my penis and said, "Masturbate yourself." At this time, Dr. Rolleston withdrew his finger from my anus and then put a second glove on his hand. He then again placed a finger in my anus by passing his hands between my legs and continued moving his finger around inside my anus while I was masturbating myself. He then said, "Tell me when you're going to come." Dr. Olson then held his other gloved hand near to my penis in a cup fashion in a position to collect sperm when I ejaculated. After a period of masturbating myself while Dr. Olston was moving his finger inside my anus, I ejaculated into his other gloved hand. As soon as this happened, Dr. Olston went to a sink in the room and commenced washing his hands and said to me, just get dressed. I then pulled my underpants and shorts back on and saw that Dr. Olston was taking his gloves off at the sink. Dr. Olston then turned and said to me, "No, there is no blood in your semen and no blood in your anus. That's the most important thing. You're fine, just rest." Dr. Olston opened the door and left. I did not see him writing notes at any time during my medical examination, and I do not recall receiving any medication for my back pain. I remember feeling bewildered, confused and very upset as I left the room. I was unaware whether what had just happened to me was a normal or appropriate medical procedure. It felt to me like it had all happened very quickly. I was already in physical pain and he increased that pain immensely. When I reached my grandmother, she asked, "What happened? What did he say?" I replied, "Nothing, it's fine." At no point of my medical consultation did Dr. Olston ask me questions relating to my injury or request an X-ray. In the course of preparing my statement, I've been shown a copy of my patient record held by the Royal North Shore relating to my consultation with Dr. Olston on the 24th of July 1979. The patient record shows PR, which I now know to mean performed rectal. There is no mention of an X-ray on my patient record. I did not tell anyone about my abuse by Dr. Olston at the Royal North Shore until in or around 1997. In or around 1997, there were a number of high-profile pedophiles being exposed in Sydney by the Wood Royal Commission. In particular, I remember Philip Bell and his alleged pedophile activities around the northern beaches attracted a lot of media publicity. I knew Philip Bell as he used to often come to Manly Beach where my friends and I surfed. He never molested me. The media reports triggered a reaction in me. Every time I saw a news media about Philip Bell, it would trigger memories of Dr. Olston and I would not be able to stop thinking about it. I was tired of the memories of the abuse and how they were affecting my relationships with my girlfriends. I wanted to put a stop to the constant thoughts about Dr. Olston. I started to speak about my abuse by Dr. Olston at the Royal North Shore in or around 1997. I cannot remember the first person that I spoke to concerning my abuse, but I do remember there was a small group of people that I spoke to, and I spoke to all of them within a short period of time. They included my mother, sister, girlfriend, best friend, a medical practitioner, a psychiatrist, and a psychologist. It was a time in my life where I wanted to get the abuse off my chest, and I told the people around me that I believed could also help me. In or around 1997, when I was 33 years old, I went to see Dr. Malcolm Parmenter in Mossman. I made an appointment for a consultation because I wanted to discuss the abuse. I was not sick or requiring medical attention at the time. I remember opening the discussion with Malcolm. I've got to tell you something. I spoke to Dr. Parmenter initially about the abuse as if I was seeking advice on behalf of a friend. The friend, as I explained, was a young boy who had fallen on a metal plate and was taken to the Royal North Shore. When I started to explain the abuse by Dr. Rolston, Dr. Parmenter said to me, "This happened to you, didn't it?" And I said, "Yes." I went into detail in relation to Dr. Rolston's test for internal bleeding, and I asked him whether what Dr. Rolston had done to me was an appropriate medical procedure. Dr. Parmenter responded, "No, you have been 100% sexually abused. You should do something about it." Dr. Parmenter said that the incident I had had in the playground was a bruised coccyx bone, and this was very common, known to be painful, and ordering an X-ray was the appropriate medical test. Looking for blood in my semen was not the appropriate medical procedure. I remember that it was a very awkward conversation. I could barely get the words out of my mouth. I also remember Dr. Parmenter's face appeared stunned and shocked by what I was telling him. I asked Mr. Parmenter how I would go about doing something about my abuse. He gave me the phone number for the Healthcare Complaints Commission, and he said, "You need to make a complaint." I've been shown a letter written by Dr. Parmenter dated the 2nd of April 2007 to Miss Rochelle Dunlop, HCCC, outlining his recollection that I mentioned an episode of sexual abuse by a medical practitioner, but that he had no medical record of when this occurred or the details of the abuse in my medical history. I accept that Dr. Parmenter may not have made a written record of all the matters I spoke to him about. In or around 1998, when I was 34 years old, I consulted a psychiatrist, Dr. Lisa Lampe, in Cremorne in relation to anxiety and panic attacks. I first saw Dr. Lampe on or around the 13th of February 1998. I informed Dr. Lampe about my sexual abuse as a 15-year-old boy by a doctor at the Royal North Shore. In relation to the abuse, I was explicit and detailed because Dr. Lampe was a cognitive behavioural specialist who was assisting me with tools to reduce and manage my anxiety attacks. I do not remember Dr. Lampe telling me to make a complaint or speak to the police about the matters I spoke to her about. I've been shown a letter written by Dr. Lampe dated the 28th of February 2007 to Miss Dunlop outlining the concerns I discussed with her in my consultation. I accept that the details in this letter would be a fair account of what I discussed with her. However, I do remember speaking about the abuse in more detail than what is recorded in the letter. Dr. Lampe may not have made written notes on all of the matters that I spoke to her about. In or around 1998, when I was 34 years old, I consulted a registered psychologist and clinical hypnotherapist, Miss Simonette Gow, in Neutral Bay. I saw her in relation to anxiety and panic attacks and personal problems. One of my personal problems was that I'd been sexually assaulted by a medical practitioner at the Royal North Shore at a young age. She asked me to tell her more about my sexual assault as a 15-year-old. Miss Gow listened to me when I spoke about my abuse. I've been shown an email written by Miss Gow dated the 25th of February 2007 to Miss Dunlop concerning my discussions with her in 1998. In relation to the sentence, it is my usual practice with adult clients who have experienced any form of abuse to emphasise and tell them the behaviour was wrong and that the doctor had violated his position and trust. I do not recall Miss Gow telling me that the behaviour was wrong and that the doctor had violated his position of trust to me. I recall that Miss Gow was a medical record of my visit to the Royal North Shore, and based on that record, the date was the 24th of July 1979. I also tried to obtain the name of the doctor who had abused me. I was told that it was either Roletto or Rolerto, but that they were not sure about the spelling of the name. On a different telephone call, I was also told that my patient record had notes to the effect that the doctor had performed a rectal examination on me. I remember thinking that it was rather odd for the doctor who abused me to have made a note of rectal examination on my file because it sounded incriminating to me. On or around the 13th of August 1998, I called the HCCC on the number that Dr. Parmenter provided me with. During the course of the conversation, an appointment was made for me to visit the HCCC offices on the 20th of August 1998. Following the telephone call, I was sent a small brochure called the Complaints Process in the process in the public interest by the HCCC. From reading this brochure, I began to understand the role of the HCCC and how they could help me. I also remember reading the brochure and thinking that it sounded like the HCCC were the right choice of professionals to help me with identifying and investigating Dr. Ollaston. I felt that I was in the right place to get help and to get the answers that I needed. Following my telephone call, and within a day or two, I wrote a letter to the HCCC outlining what I had discovered from speaking to the Royal North Shore Medical Records Unit and my own recollection of Dr. Ollaston. The letter was handwritten and undated. On or around the 17th of August 1998, I received a letter from Rosemary Pendlebury, the Acting Manager Operations of the HCCC. The letter acknowledged my handwritten complaint and enclosed a brochure titled Sexual Misconduct, a leaflet guide on making a complaint about a physical or sexual assault or about a sexual or inappropriate relationship by a member of the health profession. Sorry, I need a drink. As I read through this brochure, I marked the brochure with ticks to indicate how my abuse fell within the category of sexual misconduct by a doctor giving an unnecessary or inappropriate internal examination. I remember feeling again like I had contacted the right body and the right professionals to help me with my complaint. The last page of the leaflet stated that the HCCC does not have any jurisdiction over criminal matters. Lawyers within the HCCC will advise if a complaint should be referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, for action in the criminal court. Complaints can be investigated by the Commission and the criminal court at the same time. I understood from the leaflet that the ACCC would advise if my complaint was appropriate to be referred to the DPP for criminal proceedings against Dr. Rolleston in a criminal court. I remember feeling excited and enthusiastic that this is the course that my complaint would take following the ACCC investigation of Dr. Rolleston. I also received in the same letter an ACCC survey form. At that time, there was no recommendation from the ACCC to me to say I should take my complaint to the police. On or around the 20th of August 1998, I visited the ACCC offices located in Surrey Hills. The meeting was with two lawyers from the ACCC. One of the lawyers present at the meeting was Mr. David Harris, solicitor from the ACCC. I can no longer remember the name of the second lawyer I met with on that occasion. When I arrived at the ACCC offices, I sat in a waiting room before being shown into a meeting room. I told the ACCC lawyers the nature of the complaint that I wished to make. I remember their reaction appeared to be alarmed and shocked. They responded, "Are you sure about this?" And what? After I spoke, the ACCC lawyers stood up and asked to be excused from the room. They spoke to each other outside the office I was in and then returned. I was asked to go to a room that looked like a corporate boardroom and complete the survey form that I received a copy of in the ACCC letter. At the meeting, I do not recall being advised to go to the police. I do not recall precisely whether it was at this meeting, but around that time I remember the two lawyers saying to me, "It will be your word against his." And this occurred a very long time ago. My impression of the two lawyers from this meeting was that they did not know what to do with my complaint against Dr. Rolleston. They appeared to be clueless and unprepared, like they had never dealt with this type of situation before. On or around the 6th of October 1998, I received a phone call from Mr. Harris, solicitor from the ACCC. I outlined to Mr. Harris the inquiries I had made with the Royal North Shore Medical Records Unit, the information I had obtained in relation to my patient file, and said to him that it was difficult for me to obtain the proper spelling of the doctor's name. I have been shown a file note of a conversation I had on or about the 6th of October 1998 with the ACCC. The file note is a fair account of my conversation with the ACCC. But I remember speaking to Mr. Harris in a lot more detail about the abuse and my attempts to get information from the Royal North Shore Medical Records Unit. Following that telephone conversation, we agreed to do an interview the next day and to record that conversation for the purpose of preparing a statutory declaration in support of my complaint. On or around the 7th of October 1998, I was interviewed by Mr. Harris in person for the purpose of preparing a statutory declaration. This interview was recorded and Mr. Harris also took handwritten notes. During this interview, I spoke in more detail of the playground accident, the visit to the Royal North Shore with my grandmother, the abuse and my subsequent disclosure of my abuse. I have been shown a file note of a conversation I had with Mr. Harris on the 7th of October 1998 with the ACCC. In the file note, there is a diagram of the consultation room and the examination table at the Royal North Shore, which I drew at the interview. On or around the 22nd of October 1998, I received a letter from Mr. Harris enclosing a draft statutory declaration. The letter asked that if the draft statutory declaration is true and correct, to declare the document before a Justice of the Peace and return it to the ACCC as soon as possible. I did so on the 30th of October 1998. I did not receive any further written correspondence from the ACCC until the 10th of May 1999. 6.5 months later, I was given no explanation for the delay in the investigation of my complaint. While we're on that, I just wanted to add one more thing in. When I had to get the document signed for the Justice of the Peace, it's got my whole story in there. It was hard to know who to go to get it signed because I was fearing they were going to read it. I ended up getting my neighbour to do it. That was the only person I could think of that I wouldn't be embarrassed about it with. But anyway, going on. On or around the 10th of May 1999, I received a letter from Mr David Swain, Manager Prosecutions and advising HCCC. The letter was to the effect that my complaint had been assessed for investigation and the HCCC had consulted with the New South Wales Medical Board. I received this letter in May 1999, even though I had made complaints to the HCCC 9 months earlier, had several meetings, a statutory declaration, a number of telephone calls. I'd assumed that the HCCC were investigating my complaint. I did not know at this point in time who the medical board was, and the letter did not explain this. I assumed when reading this letter that the medical board was no different to the HCCC. I did not hear from either the HCCC or the medical board again until the 1st of May 2000. 12 months later, I was given no explanation for the delay in communicating with me about my complaint. On the 26th of April 2000, I called and asked to speak to Mr Harris. I was referred to Catherine Maxwell, solicitor, HCCC, and a message was taken of my call. I have been shown a note concerning my telephone call, and this is an accurate record of my message. On the 1st of May 2000, I received a call back from Miss Maxwell. I remember that in this call from Miss Maxwell, she said words to the effect, "I probably should not tell you this, but Dr. Olsen has been previously convicted for medical fraud, and that he, Dr. Olsen, doesn't seem like a nice guy." Miss Maxwell also discussed the possibility of the investigation not proceeding. I said to her, I don't think the HCCC has fully investigated this matter before making a decision on whether to proceed or not to proceed. The handwritten half of the document records part of this conversation that I had with Miss Maxwell. I do not accept that the handwritten record would be a fair account of our telephone conversation. I do not recall that Miss Maxwell gave me update of the HCCC investigation. I'm also confident that the HCCC had not taken any steps to investigate my complaint from the time I provided my statutory declaration or on or around the 30th of October 1998. The information that I can recall receiving from Miss Maxwell is that telephone conversation related to Dr. Olsen's previous conviction for medical fraud and his employment at that time in Broken Hill. So, that's one. I also do not recall saying words such as, I understand the rationale for the HCCC not to proceed. I feel confident that I would not have said those words because I did not understand why the HCCC would consider terminating my complaint without having investigated it first. I expected at the very least they would obtain my patient file from the Royal North Shore, put forward my patient file to other medical practitioners for an opinion on whether the procedure was appropriate. I expected the HCCC to ask Dr. Olsen why he did not order an X-ray for a bruised coccyx bone, and I expected the HCCC to ask Dr. Olsen why he expected there to be blood in my semen. I was confident Dr. Olsen would not be able to deny my complaint or say that he cannot recall because I knew from the Royal North Shore Hospital Medical Unit that he had written down on my patient notes that he had performed a rectal examination on me. To my mind, those were the obvious next steps for the HCCC, and that was what formed my discussion with Miss Maxwell. For these reasons, I do not accept that the handwritten record is a fair record of what my conversation with Miss Maxwell was at the time. On or around the 1st of May 2000, I received a letter from Miss Maxwell. This letter was written following my telephone call with Miss Maxwell. In the letter, Miss Maxwell apologised for the delay in updating me on the progress of the investigation. For the reasons I have already mentioned, I do not recall receiving an update on the HCCC's progress in investigating my complaint, and I do not believe that the HCCC had in fact taken any steps to investigate my complaint. Miss Maxwell informed me that Dr. Rolleston had not responded to the HCCC's letter on the 7th of September 1999, and a further request had been sent. It surprised me that the HCCC had not attempted to make a telephone call to Dr. Rolleston in relation to his lack of response to the letter that had been sent 8 months prior. By way of analogy, if I had a creditor who I had not paid for over 8 months, I would be very lucky not to receive a telephone call. Miss Maxwell was also leaving the HCCC and was being replaced by Mr. Swain. I remember that when I received Miss Maxwell's letter, I called the HCCC office and was told that Jackie would be the case officer on my complaint. I wrote this down on the letter. I recall calling Miss Jacqueline Dale, HCCC, known as Jackie, in the HCCC offices between the 1st of May 2000 and the 30th of July 2001 to introduce myself and my complaint. I do not recall receiving any telephone calls or letters from Miss Dale over the following 8 months. In my opinion, Miss Maxwell's departure was triggering the HCCC to review my complaint and to check on the progress of my complaint. I've been shown a copy of the HCCC's letter of the 1st of May 2000 to Dr. Rolleston. The letter seeks a response to the HCCC letter of the 7th of September 1999, 9 months earlier, and to which Dr. Rolleston had not responded to. On or around the 30th of July 2001, I received a phone call from Miss Dale. She apologised for the length of time in investigating the case. She also told me about the difficulties in my complaint against Dr. Rolleston, including that the doctor could apply for a stay of proceedings due to the delay in making the complaint, the difficulty of providing events and credible witnesses, and lack of corroboration. I said to Miss Dale that I was going to confront Dr. Rolleston because I wanted to put pressure on the HCCC to expedite my complaint. I've been shown a file note of Miss Dale's conversation with me on or around the 30th of July 2001. And I accept that the file note is a fair account of our telephone conversation. At the end of the file note, it is written, ask him if he is still seeking assistance of counsellor. How is he? I do remember telling Miss Dale that I had sought counselling assistance from Dr. Lampy and Miss Gow, but I do not recall her asking me something personal like how I am. I do not recall anyone at the HCCC ever asking me anything personal like, how are you going? Are you all right? Anything like that. My conversations with the HCCC were usually centred on the delay in my coming forward with my complaint. On or around the 28th of September 2001, I received a phone call from Mr. Swain. Mr. Swain explained that Miss Dale had left the HCCC and he had taken over the matter. Mr. Swain said that he would be preparing an investigation report and recommending that no action be taken in the matter, as there was no longer a public interest in pursuing a complaint of this nature against Dr. Rolleston. I responded by asking him why the HCCC would not take action against a doctor who is known to have committed medical fraud, and I said I was afraid that Dr. Rolleston was going to continue doing to other children what he had done to me. Mr. Swain asked how I knew about the medical fraud. I did not mention Miss Maxwell's name in response. It seemed to me that I had been given snippets of information about Dr. Rolleston from various staff working on my file, but no one gave me a roadmap of how the HCCC were investigating my complaint, if they were investigating it at all. Mr. Swain said the HCCC was not going to refer my complaint to the police or the Department of Community Services. I asked why, and he explained this was for the same reason that the HCCC were not going to pursue my complaint. The reasons were the age of the complaint and that there was no public interest in pursuing it after such a long time, and there had been no other complaints against Dr. Rolleston of the same nature. Mr. Swain asked me if I had considered going to the New South Wales Police. I said that I might go to the New South Wales Police. I asked him why the HCCC would not refer my complaint to the police. He explained the same reasons, which were the age of the complaint, no public interest, and no other corroborating complaint had been received. Based on what Mr. Swain said to me, I did not think the New South Wales Police would consider my complaint differently to how the HCCC viewed it over the last 3 years. I have been shown a file note prepared by Mr. Swain of my telephone conversation with him. I accept that the file note is a fair record of my conversation with Mr. Swain. My conversation with Mr. Swain annoyed me and continues to annoy me today. It was completely useless of the HCCC to do nothing about my complaint and then to terminate the investigation on the basis of no public interest. I do not know what the legal meaning of no public interest is or what the HCCC understood by the words public interest, but I have no doubt in my mind that if I were to go on a radio and say that there had been a pedophile working with children in the Royal North Shore Hospital and he was still working with children in Broken Hill, that there would have been a media uproar and the public would be very interested. In my opinion, the HCCC were completely ineffectual in how they didn't actively investigate my complaint and then terminated it. When I reflect on this conversation, I realise now that I should have, at the time, taken the complaint to the New South Wales Police. At that time, I did not take the complaint to the New South Wales Police, as my main concern with Dr. Rolleston was to stop him from being a doctor and hurting other people. I understood the HCCC and not the New South Wales Police were the right people to make this happen. Having been told that the HCCC would not refer my complaint to the police, I did not think the police would be any more interested in my complaint than the HCCC. The HCCC investigation report dated the 28th of September 2001 provides an outline of the investigation steps by the HCCC in relation to my complaint. I was given a copy of the HCCC by his writing on the hospital record. This is an interval of 10 months. The report goes on to state, on the 22nd of June 2000, Dr. Rolleston responded through his solicitors and confirmed that it is his writing on the notes. This was an interval of 9 months. I found the pace of the HCCC's correspondence to Dr. Rolleston to be inattentive and the officers were asleep on the job. The HCCC investigation report is consistent with the message the HCCC lawyers had been conveying to me from about 1998, including words to the effect, "It's your word against his and don't get your hopes up." I felt the HCCC did not want to upset the status quo and were more interested in protecting Dr. Rolleston than they were in pursuing my complaint. My response to the HCCC was usually, but he's working out in Broken Hill and is probably doing it to the people up there as well. My impressions of the HCCC is that they did not understand that when you're 15 years old and you are abused, it takes time to build your confidence and to think of a strategy on how to approach your abuse. The HCCC response was always the same. They always spoke about the passage of time as a roadblock to my complaint, but I felt they had never dealt with a complaint before that was similar to mine. At no time in my dealings with the HCCC did they actively refer me to counselling services or to the police. I recall receiving no help from the HCCC in relation to my complaint. On or around the 17th of November 2001, I received a letter from the HCCC Commissioner Amanda Adrian informing me that the HCCC had decided to terminate my complaint. It was a deeply disappointing and annoying decision. I felt the HCCC had been useless for the past few years in investigating Dr. Rolleston and then had proceeded to terminate my complaint. Eventually, it seemed that I would not get anywhere with the HCCC and I stopped pursuing my complaint. On or around the 24th of October 2006, I received a telephone call from Miss Anne Harvey, Medical Board. Miss Harvey advised that the board was reviewing complaints and that my complaint against Dr. Rolleston would be reviewed. I responded with words to the effect, I would be 100% happy for this to happen. I've been shown a file note prepared by Miss Harvey of my conversation with her on or around the 24th of October 2006, and to the best of my memory, this is a fairly accurate record of that conversation, in addition to the matters detailed in the file note. I also remember saying words to the effect, Dr. Rolleston is going to get other people, you need to stop him from practicing now. This was the first time that I had been contacted by Miss Harvey. At the time, I was not aware that Miss Harvey was from the medical board or that the medical board was distinct from the HCCC. I assumed that she was, in fact, calling from the HCCC. On or around the 23rd of November 2006, I received a letter from Miss Harvey in relation to a review of complaints against Dr. Rolleston. I understood from the letter that the Medical Board's Conduct Committee had reviewed my complaint and had referred it to the HCCC for an investigation. The outcome of the complaint would depend on an assessment and an investigation by the HCCC. It was the most circular process I had encountered. I was not told that the HCCC or the Medical Board had received other complaints against Dr. Rolleston that had triggered the reinvestigation of my complaint. After I spoke to Miss Harvey, I started to search the internet for information on Dr. Rolleston. I read that Dr. Rolleston had been deregistered in the past for bulk billing his dead patients or for similar matters. On or around the 31st of January 2007, I was contacted by Miss Dunlop. I was told that the HCCC was reopening my complaint and that both Miss Dunlop and Mr. Robert Beats and HCCC would like to interview me. I've been shown a file note of this conversation and it is an accurate record of the telephone conversation. This conversation was followed by a letter dated the same day. On or around the 6th of February 2007, I was interviewed by both Miss Dunlop and Mr. Beats, and the meeting with the HCCC was much more positive than all my previous dealings. The HCCC offered to obtain medical records, whereas previously they had not, and offered to speak to the persons I had previously disclosed the abuse to. I had been shown a file note of this conversation, which is an accurate record. Following my meeting on the 6th of February 2007, I made a statement to the HCCC on the same day. The statement was witnessed by Miss Dunlop. The statement adopted the previous statutory declaration that I made to the HCCC on the 30th of October 2007. On or around the 20th of December 2007, I received a letter from Miss Dunlop updating me on my complaint against Dr. Rolleston. I understand that my complaint was going to be reviewed by expert reviewers. In or around January 2008, I was contacted by Detective Senior Constable Aaron Ferguson, New South Wales Police. I was told that New South Wales Police were conducting an investigation into Dr. Ollaston. I agreed to give full support to this investigation. On or around the 11th of April 2008, I received a letter from Mr. Karen Pelham, Commissioner HCCC, informing me that my complaint was being referred to the Director of Proceedings to decide whether a complaint should be prosecuted, citing various legislation. I felt the letter was ordinary. After 10 years of asking the HCCC to look at my complaint, it seemed they were still deciding whether to take action. On or around the 30th of April 2009, I received a telephone call and then an email from Miss Rhonda Inner, Senior Legal Officer, HCCC. She asked me to meet with HCCC's counsel, Mr. Philip Strickland, a senior barrister at the MLC Centre in Sydney CBD. I agreed to meet with him. On or around the 4th of May 2009, I met with Mr. Strickland. I had a lengthy conversation with Mr. Strickland where I spoke about the abuse, the people I had told about the abuse, and what was motivating me to see the matter through to having Dr. Ollaston brought to justice. I understood the meeting to be an interview process whereby Mr. Strickland was testing to see if I would be a good witness in court in relation to being a credible and reliable witness. Mr. Strickland kept saying I was credible and reliable in that interview. I've been shown a copy of the file note taken of my conference with Mr. Strickland. I accept that this is a fair record of my interview with Mr. Strickland. Coming out of the interview with Mr. Strickland, I again had expectations that the HCCC were going to investigate Dr. Ollaston and have him deregistered as a doctor. However, I did not hear from Mr. Strickland or the HCCC again that year. On the 3rd of July 2009, New South Wales Police charged Dr. Ollaston. I was grateful for the work done by New South Wales Police and in particular Detective Aaron Ferguson. The pace of the investigation and the case prepared during the 1 year that I was working with the New South Wales Police far exceeded what the HCCC had done in 10 years. My complaint was the 11th count against Dr. Ollaston in the criminal trial. I gave evidence at the criminal hearing. I was happy with how well the New South Wales Police investigation was carried out and with the trial process itself, but I was appalled by the final sentence of the trial. When the judge handed down the sentence in mid-2011, Dr. Ollaston received 31 months for his abuse on me, which I understood got reduced because of Dr. Ollaston's age. I found it very upsetting, disturbing that Dr. Ollaston ended up only serving 18 months non-parole period and a total sentence of 4 years for 11 counts of indecent assault on 12 victims. It was a very light sentence for very serious misconduct and for the impact that it had on all the victims' lives. If I could offer a suggestion, I would have liked the HCCC to play a role in the criminal trial. There was no HCCC officer present at the criminal trial with us. In October 2010, when the criminal trial was in full swing, no one from the HCCC gave evidence to say that complaints about Dr. Ollaston had been made 12 years earlier. If there had been one HCCC officer available to give this type of evidence, I believe it would have added so much more credibility for the stories that complainants were giving in the criminal trial. Following the criminal trial, I received a number of letters from the HCCC updating me on Dr. Ollaston. This included the following: a letter dated the 26th of May 2010 from Karen Mobbs, Director of Proceedings, HCCC, advising that the HCCC had decided to prosecute a complaint against Dr. Ollaston. A letter dated the 17th of August 2012 from Miss Mobbs advising that my complaint was going to be referred to a medical tribunal. A letter dated the 19th of April 2013 from Miss Michael Darmody, Senior Legal Officer, HCCC, outlining details of a hearing on the 6th of May 2013. I was not expected to give evidence for the hearing. A letter dated the 6th of June 2013 from Mr. Darmody, advising that Dr. Rolliston's registration as a doctor had been cancelled, but that he could make an application for registration after 4 years. The letter provided a link to the medical tribunal judgment. As a 15-year-old boy, I was too embarrassed and traumatised to talk about what happened to me, and I bottled it up inside my head. The mental and emotional effects of the abuse started to take its toll. Dr. Rolliston was my first sexual experience, and it made me wonder if I was a homosexual and whether I would become a homosexual even though I didn't want to be. I was angry and resentful towards my mother and father due to them not being able to protect me from a sexual predator like Dr. Rolliston. It took me 20 years before I finally told them both about my abuse. Following the abuse, I started to have panic attacks. I'd be hyperventilating, and I could not leave the house because of agoraphobic panic attacks. I did not want to socialise, and I became very depressed and had suicidal thoughts that scared me even more. All through school, this condition became more and more of a problem. I could not even sit for my high school certificate, and I had to repeat that year. A year later, when I finished the HSC, I began working, and I found it very hard to hold on to a job with my increasing panic attacks and depression. I sought treatment for my depression from different psychiatrists and psychologists and was given medication. With the exception of Dr. Parmenter, no one could give me constructive advice on what to do about my abuse. The abuse has also impacted my relationships with girlfriends. I found it hard to accept advances from sexual partners, and I always had to be in control. I had major trust issues with everyone, making life very complex and difficult. What makes me very angry is that the abuse was a relatively short, terrifying experience in my life, and Dr. Rolliston would not have given it another thought after I left his examination room, but it has been a lifetime of mental anguish for me. The sexual abuse I mean by Dr. Rolliston has had a major impact on my life and has changed me in so many ways. I really wanted to have my own family in my 30s, but was still too anxious and depressed. It is only in the last 10 years or so that I have finally married and had a family of my own. I still battle with this experience mentally and emotionally, and I'm always going to have to. The effects of Dr. Rolliston's abuse will always be with me. I'm extremely annoyed with the HCCC. I did everything the HCCC asked me to do, whether it was writing complaints, writing statutory declarations, attending meetings and giving them details each and every time they asked me to come to their offices. The HCCC could have acted sooner to stop Dr. Rolliston from being a doctor. The HCCC could have done more to be involved in the criminal trial. The speed at which the HCCC looked at my complaint still makes me feel upset and angry today. I went to the HCCC asking for help in 1998. They managed to have Dr. Rolliston deregistered as a doctor in 2013 after he had been already convicted. The HCCC pace of doing work, taking 15 years to remove a child predator from medical practice, is just too slow. Having the HCCC working at that pace is a danger to the public. From the time that I made my complaint to the HCCC, I never felt supported. The HCCC did not do anything until Dr. Rolliston had already been convicted and sentenced. I feel that the HCCC took too long to act. I'm very grateful for the work of Detective Ferguson. If it wasn't for him, Dr. Rolliston would not have been arrested and convicted. He did an amazing job, and I cannot thank him enough. I'm going to have a drink of water. I wonder if all Dr. Rolliston's victims have been uncovered, particularly since there seems to be no victims uncovered in Broken Hill. There should be a protocol or policy to seek out victims where a predator is discovered. I really want to know how the Royal North Shore Hospital allowed this situation to happen. My grandmother had accompanied me to the Royal North Shore and intended to come with me to see the doctor. My grandmother was directed to leave by the doctor and she was taken away from me by the nurse. I was left alone with Dr. Rolleston in a locked room. Why was a child left alone with a doctor in a locked room? I would like to know the protocols and policies of the Royal North Shore. I would like to know the protocols and policies the Royal North Shore had in place in 1979 to protect children from the risks of sexual abuse. I would also like to know whether the protocols and policies have changed to prevent this happening to children today and in the future. I would like an apology from the HCCC and both an apology and acknowledgement of my abuse from the Royal North Shore. I would like the Royal Commission to understand what happened to me at the Royal North Shore and to make recommendations to improve the system for how children are cared for in hospitals so that sexual abuse is prevented. Thanks.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I do, Your Honour.
Well, I think we might then take the morning adjournment and come back
Thank you.
after